for both 6X and CS. So my name is David Francis. I'm also going to be presenting this along with Georgia for Joe. And so just to basically run through sort of the agenda today. So the first thing that we'll do is basically overview of functionality. We'll go through the process of ordering and resulting a microbiology specimen, and we'll go through the associated routines. After we do an overview of functionality, we'll go through the actual list of dictionaries. So this is a list of dictionaries that we'll be covering today. We'll be starting with the department first, and then gradually working our way through the procedure dictionary, procedure prompt, and then the last dictionary that we have is the IS Access dictionary. So I'm just going to take a moment to actually change my screen and revert. Okay, so here we're just in your basic LIS main menu. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually go ahead and place a requisition for a blood culture, and we'll go through the resulting process. So after requisition menu, you're going to go into Enter Edit. And then we're going to go ahead and select the test patient. Here we're just going through the fields in your requisition routine. We're going to mark the collection date as today and the collection time as being now. We are going to mark the specimen as being received. Here we're getting prompted for some more received routines, the receive date, receive time, and the receive by user. Here on the right-hand side, you do have a field for label printing. You can specify a different label device to print labels to. If you already had your client or location set up in the LIS client location dictionary, the system will look to printing labels to the printer that's assigned to either the client or location. So from the orders field, if you do look up here, we call it an unrestricted lookup. So this is going to actually do a lookup into the procedures that are defined for your lab test, your blood bank test, and your microbiology procedure dictionary. So here you can see that it's an unrestricted lookup, so we have tests from both blood bank, microbiology, and lab. So to actually do a lookup into your microbiology procedure dictionary, you can do a /M followed by a lookup, and that will actually do a lookup into the procedures that are defined for your microbiology procedure dictionary. So as I said, the example that we're going to go ahead and order is a blood culture. After you enter in the order, the system is going to then prompt you with a source. So where you see the cursor stop right now is where we're actually going to capture our source or where that specific specimen came from. This field is a lookup to the sources that are defined on your procedure. Later in procedure dictionary, we'll show you where to actually associate and build those sources. So the next field you come to is your specimen description field. Specimen description allows you to further enter a description that's going to further modify the source that you selected for that specific order. So here when I do a lookup, this is actually going to do a lookup into the specimen descriptions that are attached to the source. So in the source dictionary, you can specify which specimen descriptions you would like to enter. You can make this field optional. You can also make it required as well. And we'll cover that again when we look at the source dictionary. So after we enter our culture, we're now ready to file. So when I hit save, or if I press F12 to file the requisition, it's going to show me two things. It's going to show me the requisition number, and it's also going to give me the accession number for my microbiology specimen. So just a quick note about the accession numbers for microbiology. Accession numbers in microbiology are assigned on a year basis, meaning we assign it the year first, and then we assign a number to the actual specimen. Unlike lab, the accession numbers in lab work off of a month, day status. So if you filed an order for today, you would have 0307 in your prefix, followed by, you would have an 0307 and then followed by the prefix and then the actual specimen number. So now that we ordered our blood culture, we're now ready to enter some results. So I'm going to close out of here and close out of the rest of the requisition screen. So to get to your results entry menu for microbiology, there's two ways you can do it. You can either go through your specimen desktop, which will branch you into the specimen desktop, and there's a footer button for entering results. You can also go through the standard way, which is the results entry menu, which is right off your microbiology menu. So now we're going to go ahead and open this routine up. Okay, so go to the specimen field. That's where we're going to enter the specimen number. So this is the first screen you would typically see in your resulting process. Down at the bottom here, we have specific setup information. So the setup fields you can see are going to actually record your setup date time of the actual culture. So the setup information is recording the date, time, and the user that actually set up the culture in your lab. There's a few different options of how you can make this information appear. You can make it required, or you can also set it to be optional. It entirely depends on how you want to set. When we go over the procedure dictionary, I'll show you where that is actually set. The other option that you have for the setup information is that you can have specific information automatically default. So normally these fields aren't filled out. A user manually has to fill out the setup information, but you can have the system automatically default that information into the field. So at your results field, if you do an F9 lookup, you're going to see all of the result codes that are attached to your blood culture. So we have most of the standard ones. We have enter, E for enter results, G for growth. You can set up custom result codes in your procedure dictionary. Like you can make a custom result code to say something like no growth over 3 days or no growth over 72 hours. We do have the ability. The result codes that are hard-coded by Meditech include E enter results, G growth, no print, quantity not sufficient, and test not performed. So go ahead and enter it results. I'm going to select E. Before I do that, the system is actually telling me that I need to enter a setup user, which I'm going to do. Sorry, it's just taking a bit of a minute here. Okay, so now we should be good to put in our results. Okay, so the first screen, I just want you to ignore these first three or four tabs for a second. So normally, the first screen that you'd be brought to is a culture page. I just want to take a second and just explain that you can customize the pages and the tabs that appear up at the top. Generally, it's good to have the culture page first, and then the rest of the pages after that. So what you're looking at is a culture page. Culture pages have two specific purposes in microbiology. You can enter organisms on this page, and you can also respond to procedure prompts. So at the organism field, we do a last line lookup. We're going to go ahead and select our organism. So we're going to say in this case that we found E. coli in the blood. You'll notice that after I put in the organism, this is where my procedure prompts default into. The procedure prompts are set up, again, on the procedure level, and we'll talk about those a little later. Here we have a few procedure prompts that we need to respond to, including one for state reporting purposes. Note that you can set up a state reportable prompt to send exclusive results to a public health recipient. Okay. So that is an example of a culture page. The next kind of page that we have in microbiology is a paragraph page. Paragraph page is basically a free text editor that you can use to free text in results. If you have an additional interpretation or you have additional notes that you want to enter into the session, this is what this field can be used for here. So it specifically consists of a free text editor to enter in results. The third type of result entry screen that we have is our questionnaire page. What you're looking at here is an example of a questionnaire page. It would typically contain questions or procedure prompts that need additional answers. This is, again, something that's set up in the procedure dictionary. So on the questionnaire level, you would have to set up procedure prompts and attach those. So again, we'll explain that later. So the last final step that we would usually have in our resulting process is entering sensitivities. So on the susceptibility tab, what you're looking at is an example of the organism and the susceptibility procedure. Down at the bottom, if there's any active antibiotic medications the patient is currently taking, those are going to show here. So to enter sensitivities, at the enter field, you're going to mark that as yes, and you're going to select the susceptibility procedure to enter your results on. It is possible to link specific sensitivity procedures to your organism. Oftentimes, organisms have specific grantains or specific sensitivity procedures that are set up. In the organism dictionary, we can actually attach a sensitivity procedure to each organism. So that's something that you can set up. But if you do an F9 lookup here, this is going to do a lookup to all of your sensitivity procedures that are built in your MIC procedure dictionary. So once you've selected your sensitivity panel, you can then go ahead and enter your sensitivity values for your antibiotics. So this tab shows the associated antibiotics that are going to be tested in conjunction with the sensitivity for the organism. The sensitivity values that the system uses will come from the antibiotic dictionary. The system will also use either the Kirby-Bauer zone sizes, or they will use the MIC dilutions that are set up in the antibiotic dictionary. So here you can see that the system is pulling in MIC values for the specific sensitivity procedure. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to actually skip the rest of the antibiotics in the panel, and I'm going to go ahead and file results for this specimen. So when I file the results for this specimen, I get an option box popped up. There's several different statuses that we have in microbiology, unlike lab, where it's you either final verify it specimen or you preliminary verify specimen. We have 4 different options. So let's just say if I had recorded no growth on an organism, and I was still waiting to see if there was a growth, additional growth, I could select the preliminary verified option, and that would let me go back and later file results on the specimen. But since in this case we've already identified an organism on the specimen, we can go ahead and final verify it. So we just have to do one additional step. We have to click Save at the bottom. And that brings up a whole different range of options. So in the File MIC results screen, we have the option to broadcast results. If they're not already set up to broadcast per the patient's location, you can select the first option to manually broadcast the results. If you select Edit Requisition, that'll branch you back into the requisition routine. From this option box, you can also select to print both the internal and external reports. So selecting either of these options will print the internal inquiry or external inquiry. The last 2 options that you have, you can choose to call results to the provider if that was necessary, or in some cases, if you need to suppress activity from the specimen, you can do that as well. The reason the print work hard field is blanked out is because we don't have an MIC work hard associated to the procedure. So let's just say, in a real life scenario, the results are probably already set up to broadcast, so we're just going to go ahead and print the external report. Okay, so that was an overview of both the ordering and resulting process. So now that we went over just a basic overview of functionality, we'll cover some of the dictionaries. Georgia here is going to present the department, source, specimen description, and the source category dictionary.
Okay, so hi everyone. For those that don't know me, my name is Georgia Frazo, and I'm a lab application specialist here at Meditech. So we're first going to start off by going right into the dictionaries, and we'll start with the department dictionary. So within our department dictionary, this is really going to be where we want to actually build our departments that are going to be included within our microbiology module. Okay, so here we can choose routine microbiology. So we have our active yes or no. Yes, if we do want to make this department available. No, if we do not want users to use this department. We have our name, which is going to be our routine microbiology. We have our abbreviation, which is going to appear on management reports. And then we have our prefix. This will be the alpha character that will be included in our specimen number. So you could see previously from our example, an example of a specimen number would be 18:M and say 1 if this was the first specimen of 2018. And then we also have our file maintenance days. So here we would want to define the number of days after a certain barcode has been generated that the barcodes will start to recycle themselves again for the labels within this department. And this is usually set to 365, for example. Okay, so coming out of our department dictionary, we're going to go straight into our source category dictionary. So our source category dictionary is essentially going to act as a dictionary where we can establish general categories that group individual sources. Just give this a second to pop up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do a lookup here at our mnemonic prompt. And you can see here we have our general categories set up as well as our print numbers. So you can see here our print numbers, each different print number is going to represent a different category. So for example, for our wound, we have the print number of 600. We'll be able to see as we look further in our source dictionary that when we have a specific source within the wound category, such as a leg wound, we would be able to see that the print number will extend past the 600 level, sort of giving it a unique identifier within the wound category itself. So I'll go ahead and select the wound. We can see we have our active yes. We would set this to no if we did not want users to be able to use this. We have our name, which is wound. We have our abbreviation, which is also, we can either use the name or we can use a shortened version. This would appear on our management reports. We have our print number, which is going to be just the 600. And then we also have our EMR ID. Here we're going to want to include our EMR ID for which the source category can be identified in the EMR. Okay, so next we're going to be going into our source dictionary. And here in our source dictionary, we're going to want to define the various sources from which a microbiology specimen can be obtained and resulted. Okay, so going right into our lookup, we can see here that for our leg wound, which is part of our source category for wound, we can see here that past the decimal point, we have 670, which is going to uniquely identify this leg wound within the wound source category overall. So we can see here we have active set to yes. We have our full name listed here below, as well as our abbreviation and our print number. We can see that 670 is our specific identifier within the wound source category. We can see here at the category prompt we have our source category defined wound of what we just saw in the previous dictionary. Once this prompt is a lookup into our source category dictionary. So once we do identify our category here, over here to the right, our name will populate in, and as you can see, this is a gray box, so I cannot edit this. Next, we have our results susceptibility target. This is going to be where we define where in the body you would like the antibiotic to have its mechanism of action. So here you can see that we would want a systemic reaction associated with our leg wound. We have our print susceptibility targets next. So here we're going to record one or more targets that you wish to appear on reports. So our system will print antibiotic data such as dosage, route of administration, and susceptibility reaction for each target that is specified. And this is a scrolling field, so you can enter as many targets here as you would like. So here you can see we also have our systemic attached as well. Next, coming over to our non-reportable antibiotics prompt. So this is going to be where we can define if an antibiotic should be defined as not reportable. The system is going to essentially look to 6 different locations within the microbiology module to determine whether or not an antibiotic should be reportable. It's first going to look at the microbiology instrument dictionary at the instrument level in the analyzer type dictionary. It's going to look to the antibiotic dictionary, the source dictionary that we are currently in, the organism dictionary, the procedure dictionary for S-type procedures, and lastly, the calculation dictionary. So these are going to be all places that we will see throughout the course of this presentation. So this is going to be the first instance where we see our source dictionary. And this is going to be a lookup to our antibiotic dictionary that I will be going over later on during this presentation. So if we do a quick lookup here, we'll be able to see all of our antibiotics defined within that dictionary. So moving on down to our LIS site prompts. If we are using any interoperability mapping or sending out this specimen, here we would want to enter the site from the lab site dictionary that we will be interfacing with. So I can do a lookup here and it'll bring me into the lab site dictionary, and I can define the clinic, for example. The name is going to default in from the lab site dictionary. So once again, we can see that this is a gray box over here, so the system will not allow me to highlight or change its name. And then lastly, coming over to our mnemonic prompt, this is going to be where we place the code that this site we are interfacing with uses to refer to our specific source of leg. So for example, if our clinic refers to leg as LG, we would define that mnemonic here as well. And we do have the option to define as many LAS sites here as we would like, as this is a scrolling prompt. Next, we have our Ask Specimen Descriptions field. Here, this prompt is going to allow specimen descriptions to appear, enter, edit, requisition routine, or in the OM order routine when a mic order is placed. So to give the user the option of entering a specimen description during requisition, we can set this to yes, or we can also set it to no as well. And then lastly, we also have the O for optional, that a user will have the ability to enter a specimen description, but it would not be required. So keep in mind when we do have this prompt set to yes, that the specimen description will be a required prompt that the user must enter during requisition. Next over here, we have our nomenclature mapping. This is going to be where we would define our nomenclature map that would be used for any sendos. This would be a lookup into MIS. And then lastly, coming down to our restricted source descriptions, if we are allowing the users to enter a source description, a specimen description, excuse me, for our specific source, we can then come down here and define all the appropriate specimen descriptions that the user would be allowed to choose from. So here we can see that we have LT for left and RT for right. This is really going to allow clients to mandate what specimen descriptions their microbiology users are able to enter when requisitions are being placed. This is really going to allow a consistency within the microbiology module. as opposed to having users enter free text. So if we do not have any restrictions for specimen descriptions, keep in mind that any and all specimen descriptions that are defined will be available to the user to be used. Okay, and lastly, we're going to go into our specimen description dictionary. So in this dictionary, we'll be able to define the detailed descriptions of the sources from which our specimens are obtained from. Okay, so branching off of our previous example, I went ahead and entered LT for left. We could see that this was used in our previous dictionary leg for our source, and it was one of our available specimen descriptions we had was LT for left. So we have our active yes, we have our name and our abbreviation. We have the ability to define a nomenclature map. Here, if this would be something that we would be sending out via an interface. And then lastly, similar to the prompts we saw in the source dictionary, at the LAS prompt, this would be a lookup into our lab site dictionary. We can choose our clinic once more and say, for example, they use a different code to identify left. We can define that here. So the system will know that when results are sent back from the clinic, and they have the mnemonic defined as left, they are referring to our LT mnemonic for our specimen description. Okay, so that concludes our introductory dictionary to our microbiology module. So I'm going to pass the controls back over to David, and we will be going over the procedure and the procedure prompt dictionary.
So as Georgia said, we're going to talk about the procedure dictionary, and then we're actually going to take, after the procedure dictionary, we're actually going to take a little bit of a break and then go into the procedure prompts. So we're actually going to look at the same, first example that we're going to take a look at is the same blood culture that we placed an order on earlier. So let me get that brought up. So before we go into this dictionary, I just want to touch about a few things. So most of the fields in the microbiology procedure dictionary are the same as the lab test dictionary. There's a few differences between lab tests and microbiology procedure. So when I'm going through these fields, I'm only going to point out the fields that are relevant to microbiology and not going to go over the ones that are specific to lab. The other thing is, so there's 4 different types of procedures that you can order in the procedure dictionary. The first one that we're going to go over is a T-type test. So a T-type test is a single orderable and resultable test, such as like a wound culture or a blood culture. So what you're seeing here is an example of a T-type test. You know that T-type test based upon the type field, such as T, so we know that is a T-type test. On page 1, you can also dissociate your department to your procedure. So if you do have a department that's assigning a session number, you'd want to attach that to page 1. The rest of the fields, besides the type and department field, are exactly the same as the lab test dictionary. So on page 2 of your dictionary is where you have some fields for attaching containers. So at the container field, this is just a lookup to your LAS container dictionary. Something that you might attach to something like the throat culture might be a container of swab, for example. You can still determine what method you're using to measure out the measurement for the container. You can use volume or count that's determined based upon the container. You can also attach your barcode set. And you also have some fields for aliquot containers as well as some fields for containers specific to ordering sites. So you can determine the specific containers based upon what site you order the test from. So we're going to go to page 3. So up at the top of page 3 is where you would attach your performing site. We have main lab attached here because that's where the test is performed. On the left-hand side of the screen is where we're actually going to determine what sources that we want to capture our procedure for. If you do a lookup here, this is just a lookup to your MIC source dictionary. So you can define all the sources that would typically, that the specimen would typically come from. Since this is a blood culture, we really have only one source of blood. If we were to enter, if we were to leave nothing in the field, we say that's an unrestricted lookup. So if you leave nothing in the field, that means the procedure can be ordered for all sources. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the field, that's where we attach our sources. In the middle of page 3, we can restrict this procedure to being ordered for certain priorities. The restrict priority field, you would define the priorities that the specimen can be ordered for. On page 3, you can also capture your billing information, including your charge and billing code. And down here at the bottom of the page, you can determine whether the test is marked as sensitive. The sensitive prompt works in conjunction with the patient portal. So if it is set to sensitive, that means that the results won't be displayed to patient portal. They will be restricted from showing on the portal. Excuse me. So I just want to, so on page 4, the first prompt that I want to draw your attention to is the broadcast print field. So the broadcast print field determines whether the results of the procedure are going to broadcast. This looks to the specific broadcasting hierarchy that we have for microbiology. I believe we have that on one of the slides, but see if we can try to find it. Yep. So I think I made a slide for broadcasting because I think it's a little easier to show like this and instead of trying to explain it. So basically, if the broadcast prompt in the procedure dictionary says no, results won't broadcast. If it is set to yes, it then checks the broadcasting hierarchy. So if the broadcast prompt is set to yes, the system will check the MIS location dictionary and the broadcast priority that's defined in your CDP. If the MIS location dictionary has the broadcast always prompt set to yes, and that broadcast priority has been defined in your CDPs, the results are going to broadcast to the location. If the broadcast always prompts and the MIS location is set to no, then the system is going to check the origin dictionary to determine when to broadcast. So generally, you can think of it as we first check the procedure dictionary, we'll then check the patient's location and the CDPs for the broadcast priority. Depending on the response to the MIS location, we'll then check the origin. So that's the summary of steps that the system will take to check to determine when results should broadcast. Okay, so I'm going to skip the field in the middle, and then on the lower right-hand side of the page, you have a prompt called allow susceptibilities, and this is just a yes/no prompt. The allow susceptibilities prompt determines whether you have the ability to enter the sensitivity values within result entry of that specific procedure. Earlier, I think you saw that after I was done entering results on the organism, I went ahead and entered sensitivities. That's because this prompt of how this prompt is set. So if you have the allow prompt set to yes, you're going to be able to access that sensitivity tab in result entry to enter your sensitivity. If it is set to no, you will just not have the ability to enter any of your sensitivity information. So the next prompt is the allow interpretation prompt. And to show this prompt, I actually have to get back into result entry for 1 second. So the next prompt, as I said, is the allow interpretation. It is also a yes/no field. Here you have the ability of defining whether you want interpretation to be captured for the procedure. So in your footer buttons for your results entry screen, you have this interpretation button. If the allow interpretation is set to yes, this interpretation button at the bottom is going to become accessible. So this is another free text editor that you have for entering an interpretation on your specimen. The next two fields that you have on page 4 are for determining your setup information. So the setup information in microbiology is the setup date, time, and user that actually set up that specific culture. At the X setup date and time and user, you have 3 different options. If you set the prompt to yes, that is going to require a setup date, a setup time, and a setup user when a user goes into results and results culture. If you set the prompt to no, that means that the system will not require or will not ask for any setup information. So if you set it to no, the system is just simply not going to record any of the setup information. You can set it O is the last option. If you set it to O, that gives you the option of resulting setup information, but it is not necessarily required. Now, if the setup information is required or optional, you can default specific information into the field without having a user manually do it. So the default setup date, time, and user field determines what kind of information we're going to default into those fields. You either have the choice of using the collected information. So if you set it to collect, the system is automatically going to default the collected date, collected time, and the collected by user into the field. If you choose receive, that means that the receive time, receive date, and receive by user is in default into the field. So we're now going to move to page 5 of the procedure dictionary, which I like to kind of call like the meat and potatoes of the procedure dictionary because it's the largest. So I just want to focus your attention basically on those 3 screens that we looked at earlier. So what you're seeing up at the top of the screen is the kind of different result entry screens that you can use to enter results in. So we actually have 4 different types. One is missing here, but it's called the multiple type page. I'm just going to add this real quickly. So I just want to talk a little bit about pages. So the type is what determines what kind of information is going to be captured. You can order your pages in order of however you want or whatever workflow works best for you. I only arrange them in this order because this is, I think, what makes the most sense from a resulting standpoint. So if you do look up at the type field, this is a lookup to the 4 different result entry screens that you have. So as I said, culture screens are used specifically to identify organisms and respond to procedure prompts. So for each of these types, you have a page name. The page name does let you free text in a specific name for the page. You could call it something like a culture page, or you could call it something totally different. Totally up to you how you want to call the page. The key field is what we call the hotkey field. So the hotkey field lets you manually assign a letter to that specific page, and then you can shift 8 using that hotkey, and that will bring you to that page. So let's say I'm currently on the multiply type page and I need to get to the culture page. I can press Shift and then the actual key, which is O in this case, and that will bring me to the actual page without having to go through all the rest of the pages. Really, this is only helpful if you have a lot of culture pages defined on your procedure, but most you should have like 4 to 5. So each page needs to be active in order for you to see it in results entry. If you set it to inactive, it just means you won't see that particular result entry stream when you go to results. If you ever need to retire an entry stream, as sometimes the case often happens that you decide you want to make the screen over or you want to add something, we recommend inactivating it instead of deleting it entirely, because when you delete it, it can cause issues with historical data. So we recommend, if you need to delete a page, we recommend inactivating it instead of deleting it. So as I said, culture pages can be used to respond to procedure prompts. On the right-hand side of the page here, this is a lookup to your procedure prompt dictionary. You can also determine whether each of those procedure prompts is inactive or active for your page. So the second field is for your defining your paragraph page. Paragraph page, as I said, is a free text editor that lets you enter an additional interpretation. There's nothing specific to a paragraph page, but over here on the right-hand side, you can select specific hand text to default into your paragraph page. So this field is actually a lookup to your canned text dictionary. So if you want specific canned text to default into your paragraph stream, this is what the field can be used for. Questionnaire page, as I said earlier, is used to capture responses to procedure prompts. So again, on the right-hand side of the screen, if you're building a questionnaire, you can just do a lookup and build your actual questionnaire. The last screen that we have, and I didn't talk about earlier, but is a multiple type page. So multiple type stream is used for attaching a multiple type prompts like a gram stain, or something that can capture multiple response codes within the same prompt. So the next field that we have is the preliminary final default field. So this field determines what option box the system is going to default to when you try filing results for the procedure. So based upon how this is set, the cursor is going to default to one of these options if you have something in this field. We would recommend setting this to something like preliminary verified or preliminary unverified, so that if the user accidentally saves the procedure results, they're not finalizing it. So the next field you have is for saving historical results. For microbiology, you do have the option of viewing and saving historical results, much like you would for lab. So if you do an upline lookup at this field, these are your different options for recording historical results. So you select all is going to capture historical results no matter what is captured for your procedure. If you set it to organism, that means historical results are only going to be reported if there is a positive organism isolation identified in your culture. If you only want to save historical results when there's an abnormal result or there's an exceptional result, you can also set the prompt to abnormal, and that will save results only when there's an exceptional or abnormal result. Once you define your option for saving historical results, the date you keep is going to determine how long the system is going to save those results for until they're biomaintained. So I believe you can set this field to something like 2,500, which is equivalent to a couple of years. And that's how many days the system will keep the results for. So we're going to look to the right-hand side of the screen now. So your default work card field, your work card can be used to basically print off a work card for your results. So this is a lookup to the MIT work card dictionary. The purpose of work cards is that it allows the tech to actually bring a work card to their computer and then document those results when they're at the bench. The next two fields are for entering in a result text for a no-growth result. So the no-growth preliminary result text field is for defining canned text that will be reported out when no-growth is reported as a preliminary result. So these two fields are both lookups to your canned text dictionary. The canned text would have to be built first and then associated to both of them. The difference is no-growth preliminary versus no-growth final. It depends on what status you're actually going to file the results at. So the next field is for defining default results. You can have results default in at a fixed amount of time or after an elapsed amount of time. So this field actually works in conjunction with these fields at the bottom. At the bottom of the screen is where you can define specific results to default in. So let's say you have a culture, it's been 72 hours since you've identified any growth. You can have no growth default in as a specific result without letting or having a user manually enter it in. So if it's at a fixed amount of time, that means that the system is going to wait till a fixed amount of time to actually default those results into. They can also determine what status to file the results at, and they can also determine what canned text to report out as well. The other option is if you set the field to elapsed. Elapsed is going to wait a certain amount of hours since the results have been filed. So when we say elapsed, this is really saying we're going to wait 40 hours since the assessment has received to default this result in. Down at the bottom of the screen is where you can also define your result code. So as I showed you earlier, you have specific codes that are coded by the system, and then you have other codes that are custom. So the result mnemonic field lets you free text in specific result code. You can then associate a canned text to report out the results when it's either preliminary or final. So that is an example of a T-type procedure. We'll look at a group-type procedure now. So the next kind of procedure, as I said, is a group type procedure. Group type procedure lets you order one or more T-type tests within the same procedure. So on page 1, your type is going to be set to G. That just indicates that it's a group type. On page 5 is where we're actually going to set up the different groups. Up at the top, you have your .standard group and your .standard1 groups. So you can create different selection profiles of tests depending on what kind of group you're trying to capture. At the bottom of the screen, you can then define certain selection criteria that the system is going to use to choose one of those groups depending on what you order. You always have to have a default group in the middle as well. The third type of T-type procedure that we have is a sensitivity type procedure. Sensitivity type procedure is a procedure that's going to be used to capture your sensitivities for results. The sensitivity panel is when you have a panel of antibiotics that's testing for sensitivities for one particular organism. On page 4 of your dictionary is where you can actually determine what type of sensitivities you're capturing, either using the Kruger method or the MIT method. So on page 5, this is where we're going to attach the antibiotics that we want to test in the sensitivity panel. This field is just a lookup to your antibiotic dictionary. And then we can also make the antibiotics non-reportable if we want to as well. If that's an antibiotic that should not be reported out for that particular organism, we can set the reportable toxin out. So the last example that we had, I was trying to find it in the dictionary, is a charge type test. Just going to build one really quickly. So a charge type test is going to be simply used to determine a charge. You could build something like an organism ID test. That's called something like an organism ID charge. And build it that way. It's important to note that the type is going to be set to C. That just indicates that it's a charge type test. Also, it's important to note that for our department, since it's a charge type test, we would want to attach a department that does not have a prefix associated to it. If we attach a department that's going to have a prefix associated to it, we're going to get an accession number generated. So it's often helpful to create a separate department for charge procedures specifically. Here for just scenario purposes, I'm just going to skip that field. But on page 3 is where you would attach your charge and your billing code for your charge type procedure. So the rest of the dictionaries that we have for today, we have the procedure prompt next, and then after that we have the antibiotic organism, and then we also have the LAS access dictionary to go over. So good to get to your procedure prompt dictionaries, you're going to go from dictionaries or MIC dictionaries, and then the procedure prompt is about halfway down. So this is what the procedure prompt dictionary looks like. So the procedure prompt dictionary is used to build different procedure prompts that you can respond to with answers. There are several different types of procedure prompts that you can build, and the procedure prompt that or the information you're trying to capture depends on the data type. So there are several different data types that you can build for procedure prompts. You could have something like a date prompt, which records the date as the recorded response. You could have an integer or a decimal prompt to record the temperature as its response. So we're going to go through and just touch upon the differences between each of the procedure prompt types and what the differences are, and we'll also be showing examples along the way. So the first one that I have brought up is the free type prompts. So I just want to mention that there are two different types of free type prompts. A free type single prompt, which is the one that you're looking at here, and then we also have a free multiple type prompt, which would be indicated with this multiple field set to yes. The multiple type prompt records one or more responses within the same response. So something like a catalase is built as a free text, free type prompt. You could also put something in the form of a question that would be considered a free type prompt. So in the dictionary on page 1, you have your prompt text. The prompt text records 25 characters or less. The prompt text that you enter is what actually is going to appear in results entry when you see the procedure prompt appear. The report text lets you type in 25 characters or less of actual text. The report text is what is actually going to print to both the external and internal reports. So unlike the prompt text which only shows up in results entry, the report text is what actually prints out to your report. So now we come to the data type field. The data type field is going to determine what information you're capturing for the specific prompt. So this is set to free, so we know it's a free type procedure prompt. The next field is your maximum length. Maximum length is going to determine how many characters you can enter in within that same procedure prompt. If you have it set to 30, that means you can only enter in 30 characters or less within your response. So on the right-hand side, you can make a procedure prompt be required. If it is set to be required, that means the user has to respond to that procedure prompt before proceeding on to other procedure prompts or other result entry screens. So we want to make it a required field. We would set that to yes. The next field is print on external reports. So this field determines whether you want to print the procedure prompt and its response to external reports. If it's something that's internal or something that only the lab staff would see, you would probably set the prompt to no. Suppress if no response. So if there is no response to the procedure prompt, you can actually have it be suppressed from printing altogether. The options that you have here, if you want to suppress the prompt from printing when there's no response, if you select B, that means it's going to be suppressed from both the internal and external reports. If you select I, that just means it's going to be suppressed from the internal report. And if you select E, that means it's going to be suppressed from the external report. So the next field we come to on page 1 is your units field. You can set up a specific measurement of units for the prompt if it so happens that it applies. Something like colony forming units per milliliter would be something that would be considered a unit. The units will appear in results entry, and they will also appear on your report. Now, the next field that you have is your nomenclature map field. This is used for nomenclature mapping, IMO purposes. If you do have a nomenclature map ID that you want to attach to the prompts, you can just do a lookup to your IMO nomenclature mapping dictionary, and that will let you actually choose a nomenclature map. So on the bottom of the right-hand side of page 1 is our result recipient field. So the result recipient field is used with respect to electronic lab reporting interfaces. We can set up a specific recipient to send specific prompt results out to that specific recipient. So let's say an example that you have a public health recipient and they want to see all positive results for specific prompts. You can attach that result recipient here. This is a lookup to your MIS outbox recipients dictionary, which is really just the outbox folder where we're sending messages. But this is where you would be sending your message to. So down at the bottom of page 1, these fields are used with respect to other vendor interfaces. So if you have another vendor interface set up that's sending or receiving discrete results, we need to map the specific dictionary entry with what the vendor has on their side. So let's say that Quest is a reference lab that's set up, and we send out CAT as the ref code, but they send CAT SE back. That's how we know how to map the prompts to what they have on their side. So now I covered page 1, we're going to go to page 2 now. So on page 2, down at the bottom of the screen is where we are actually at the top of the screen rather. This is where we're going to build all of the different answer codes for your procedure prompts. Up at the top of the screen, you can restrict the answers to a specific list. So if restricted answers below lets you determine whether you want the user to select something out of this list of response codes. If the restricted answers below is set to no, that means the user will be able to enter in or free text anything into the field. So again, only set this to yes if you want the user to be restricted from one of these results in the list. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have a field for infection control screen. You can, at this field, you can associate an infection control customer-defined screen to your procedure prompt. The customer-defined screen has to be built MIS first. So in the lookup, this is actually a lookup to just your infection control type screen. In the middle of the screen is where we associate our response codes. You can free text in any sort of numbers or letters here, indicating your response code. Your next field is for capturing the results as an exceptional result. If the abnormal field is set to yes, that means that that specific response code is going to be captured as an exceptional result. In your list of management reports, you have an exception report. If that specific code is entered and the prompt is set to yes, that means that the system will record the results as an exceptional result in the system. You can also make a specific response code be indexed to infection control. In microbiology, we do have a specific management report specifically for infection control. It's actually off of the Organism Reports tab. The infection control report is located over here. So the text field just lets you actually free text in the full response of the entry. You can capture up to 25 characters. The last two prompts on the right-hand side are for attaching your reflex prompts and an MIS notification. So the way that reflex prompts work is that you can attach a prompt to be reflexed. in the case that that specific code is entered. So let's just say, this is probably not a realistic example, but let's just say we want to reflex the AFP4 clone stain after that positive code is entered. When we enter a positive code, the AFBF reflex prompt is added. The other field that we have is in notification. We can attach an MIS notification to be indexed to the provider workload management desktop. If the specific road is entered and you have an MIS notification defined, the physician will receive a notification in their provider workload management desktop. So I said that on page 1, there is a result recipient field. There is also a result recipient field on page 2. The result recipients field on page 2 captures a result recipient specific per response code. So the result recipient field on page 1 will send something to the public health recipient whenever that specific dictionary entry has something entered into it. If you only want to send a specific message to a result recipient, for example, when you have a specific result, this is where you would set up the result recipient. So in the middle of the field, the reflex order group field is for defining a reflex order group of TEP. This is simply look up to your LIS order group dictionary. Down at the bottom, we do have fields for capturing the method. If you are recording the method, you can also record the workload as well. These last 3 fields would only apply to Canadian hospitals, but this is where you would apply your workload subsection, your workload code, and count. On page 3, you also have additional fields for capturing default workload. As I said, the default workload overrides the workload that's on page 2. And down at the bottom of page 3, you have a field for defining a default answer code. You can define a default answer code that will automatically default in response to the prompt before a user enters it in. This is helpful in cases of where 99% of the time the result is the same. I can't say that I've ever really seen this used often in my experience, but just know that it's there. And lastly, on page 3, you have a documentation field. The documentation field lets you free text in documentation or specific notes about the procedure prompt itself. This documentation also appears in the online help when you go to pull the online help within a specific prompt within results entry. That was an example of a free single type prompt. So we're just going to quickly look at a free multiple type prompt. There's very few differences between a free single and a free multiple type prompt. Just know that the multiple type field sets yes. On page 2, this is where you would associate your different response codes to be captured. So the next kind of prompt that we can build is a date type prompt. So a date type prompt is going to record the date as the actual response. There's nothing really specific about this procedure prompt that you need to know. Just know that the data type is going to be set to date. The maximum length of characters that it can record is 8. You can either enter in the date in the month, day, year, or day, month, year, depending if you're a hospital in the US or a hospital in Canada. The next kind of prompt that we can build is a time type prompt. So time type prompt, as self-explanatory as it sounds, you can capture time as a specific response. The data type is going to be set to time. maximum length is 4 characters. So we can also set up a procedure prompt to capture an integer. The data type is going to be set to INT. Just want to point out real quickly on the left-hand side of the screen, when it's an integer type prompt, you then have access to entering in a specific reference range of values. So the low limit and high limit would be considered the range ends of your range. You can also set up specific values to be flagged as exceptional if they're outside that range. So something would be, so something outside of, let's just say for this example, 5 or 9 would be considered as an exceptional result. So along with an integer type prompt, we can set up a decimal type prompt. A typical decimal type prompt that you would typically see would be called something like time type prompts, or I'm sorry, temperature. So we would probably record, if this was temperature, we would probably record the temperature as specific values. You'd probably have something called something like incubation temperature, for instance. But just know that you can now enter a decimal place with 1 or 2 places. And the last type of prompt that we have is a group type prompt. Group type prompts, you can record multiple prompts within the same group. Notice that the other fields are grayed out, but down at the bottom of the screen is where you can find your specific procedure prompts. Okay, so that concludes the procedure prompt dictionary. I'm now going to turn it over to Georgia again, and she is going to go over the antibiotic and organism dictionary.
Okay, so first we're going to start by going over the organism dictionary. So the purpose of this dictionary is to define all of the organisms that can be isolated and identified within your microbiology department. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do a lookup here. We'll choose our Staph aureus. So here we can see our active yes or no. Yes, so we can use this within the system. We have our name, which is going to be our full name of this organism. We also have our report name. So here we're going to want to enter the name that will appear on all patient reports. And then next we have the abbreviation. This is what's going to appear on all management reports. For example, our specimen and our summary reports. So on here we can see we have the print number. This is going to be the main numeric identifier for this organism within our micro module. Over here to the right, we have another checkpoint that the system will use to see if we have any non-reportable antibiotics to be associated with this organism. So this is going to be a lookup into the antibiotic dictionary. Coming down to the LAS site prompt, once more, this is going to be similar to the prompts we've been seeing in our previous dictionaries. So we're going to do a lookup into our lab site dictionary. We can choose our clinic once more, and we're going to identify our mnemonic that our corresponding lab site will be using when referring to our Staph aureus intermedius organism. So for example, our clinic may use SPAI to refer to this as opposed to our SPAAI. And like we've said in the past, this is a scrolling prompt, so we can enter as many lab sites and additional mnemonics here as we would like. So here we have our default susceptibility procedure. This is going to be a lookup into the Mike procedure dictionary. Here we're going to want to enter the default susceptibility procedure that should appear in result entry when this organism has been identified. So we can see here we have a number of procedures available to us. Here we have our notification verify rule next. This is going to be a lookup to our LIS rule dictionary. We are going to want to enter a rule which will send a notification message to the defined provider when this organism has been identified. The result must be verified before the system will evaluate the rule. If the rule is applicable, the message will then be sent. Next, we have our suppress positive culture warning. This is going to be a yes or no prompt. Here we're going to want to enter yes to suppress the warning message for a positive culture from appearing when a user identifies this organism. And we have no to allow the warning message for a positive culture to appear when a user identifies an organism. So if we set this to no or leave it as blank, it is the same thing. Go ahead and set that to no. And lastly, at the bottom of page 1, we have our result recipients field. Here we're going to want to enter the recipients to whom you want the system to send results when this organism has been identified. This could be, for example, one of our state reporting agencies. So once we identify our recipient, we then have the ability to restrict to a specific source. For example, we can identify here that we only want to send our results for our Staph aureus intermediate organism to our state reporting agency when this has been, when this culture has been obtained from the throat, for example. So we would be able to identify the throat as a source right over in this prompt. So moving on to page 2, we can see our first checkpoint here at the top is going to be for infection control. So if we want this organism to be indexed to infection control when it is isolated, we can enter yes here. We then have the ability to attach a customer-defined screen that should appear to capture further information when entering infection control information. So we can identify this here as well. This is going to be built within the customer-defined screens in MIS, so you're going to want to make sure to have those built first before attaching to the dictionary. And then we do have the ability also to index to infection control if we are obtaining this organism from a specific source, such as our throat, for example. So we'd be able to identify that here. Next, our next checkpoint is going to be our exception report. This is going to be a yes or no prompt. Here you're going to want to enter yes if this organism should be indexed to the exception report when it is isolated. So if we select yes here, we also have the ability to restrict to a specific source as well. So coming down to our auto broadcast prompt, this is going to be a yes or no prompt as well. This is going to determine if results may broadcast to a patient's location once this organism has been identified. You're going to want to enter yes here if the results should print to the patient's location, or no here if you would not, if you did not want these results to broadcast at all. So if we select yes here, we have the ability to restrict the broadcast when the organism has been obtained from a specific source and if the patient is in a specific location. So we can do a quick lookup here. We can do a throat here, and then we can say when the patient is at, we can do a lookup to our location. For example, we'll say when the patient is in 1 East and the Staph aureus has been obtained from the throat, we want the results to auto broadcast. And then lastly, on page 2, coming down to the group prompt, we have the ability to identify if this organism is grouping together a number of organisms. What we can do is we can set this prompt to yes, and now we can see our members of this group prompt will now open. So if our Staph aureus was being used to group together a number of organisms, we could do an internal lookup here to any previous entries that have been entered within the organism dictionary, and we would be able to identify those there as well. So for example, we could include our regular Staph aureus, and so on and so forth. We would be able to identify as many members of this group as we wanted. So next, we're moving right along to page 3. We have our ask prompt at the top. This is going to be a lookup to our Mike procedure prompt dictionary. Here we are going to want to enter the mnemonic of the prompt, which should default in when this organism is identified on the culture screen within result entry. So we would be able to identify one of those as well. And then to the right of that, our prompt text would show as well. As we've seen in the past, this is going to be a grayed out box that I cannot edit since this is the name that is being pulled straight from the procedure prompt dictionary. So next down below, we have our check prompt prompt. This is going to be another lookup to the Mike procedure prompt dictionary. Here we are going to want to enter the procedure prompt to be used as an extra measure to ensure the organism is being properly identified. So we can do a lookup here as well. And we can just choose our smear for now. And then we do have our reject prompt over here. This is going to be a yes or no prompt. So this prompt will determine how the system reacts to abnormal responses entered for this procedure prompt during result entry. Enter yes if the system should reject abnormal responses, not allowing the user to continue the resulting process without rectifying the abnormal result, or you can select no and the system will not take any action to reject those results. So then coming down to our normals prompt, we can see this is branching off of the previous prompts we just went over. This is going to be a lookup to the result codes defined for this prompt in the Mike procedure prompt dictionary. We are going to want to define the responses that the system should consider normal for this organism. We could do a lookup here as well, and we can say that for a normal response, we can select the no AFB scene, for example. Moving right along to the right side of the page, we have our markers prompt. This is going to be a lookup to our LIS marker dictionary. Here we're going to want to enter a marker to append every time this organism is identified. We can go ahead and do a lookup here. And we can do state reportable, for example, and then we can also restrict to specific sources as well. So there we can enter our throat, so the marker will be appended when this has been obtained from the throat source. Okay, next coming down to our source procedure, our source prompt, excuse me. We have the ability to enter a source to associate a default susceptibility procedure. So using our source once more, I now have the ability to do a lookup into the procedure dictionary, and I can enter the default susceptibility procedure that should be associated with a specific source. So this susceptibility procedure will appear automatically in result entry if the specimen has the associated source. So we could choose our gram-negative, for example. In our notification prompt, this is going to be a lookup to the MIS notification dictionary. We can enter the notification the system should generate when this organism is identified for the source defined in the source field. The notification links to the source, not to the susceptibility procedure. And then lastly, at the bottom of page 3, we have the ability to identify any LOINC codes. So this is going to be a lookup to the MIS LOINC term dictionary, or we have the ability to identify a nomenclature map, and this is going to be a lookup to the MIS nomenclature map dictionary. Okay, so that concludes our organism dictionary. I'll just cancel out of here. And next I'll be going into the antibiotic dictionary. So the purpose of the antibiotic dictionary is going to be where we can define all of the antibiotics used to perform our susceptibility procedures. All right, so starting off at our print number, I'm going to do a lookup. And we are going to pull in our azithromycin antibiotic. So we can see here I have our print number, which is our numeric to unique identifier used specifically for our azithromycin antibiotic. We have active yes or no, so we're going to want to set this to yes so we can use within the respective routines. We have our name, which is going to be the full name of this antibiotic. And then we also have our abbreviation, which is going to be used for our management reports. And then we also have a second abbreviation, which is going to be an even shortened form of the abbreviation. So next, coming back to our hierarchy of reportable antibiotics, this is going to be another spot that the system will check to determine whether or not this antibiotic should be considered reportable. So we do have this set here as yes. Next, we have our formulary prompt. This is going to be a yes or no prompt. This field is going to allow you to flag drugs that are not on the formulary within your hospital. So we can identify yes here that the specific antibiotic is on the formulary, or no that this is not on the formulary and should be flagged on external reports. And then we also have the default units. So this is going to be where we enter our units of measurement that this antibiotic is going to be measured by. So here we can put our grams. Actually, we can do milligrams for this. And then lastly, coming down to our LIS site prompt, here we're going to do another lookup into our lab site dictionary. We can choose our clinic once more, and we would identify here the mnemonic that our clinic will be using when referring to the azithromycin antibiotic. So here we can do AZIT for their specific mnemonic. Okay, so coming over to page 2, this is going to be where we can set up all of our values for our azithromycin using our MIC susceptibility. So this is going to be our minimum inhibitory concentration susceptibility. Just to give a brief overview of what this is going to be where we set up our dilution and our values on how the how this antibiotic is going to perform with specific organisms. So we can see over here at the top at our organism prompt, we have the ability to identify any organisms from our organism dictionary that will have any specific values. Usually, what you would want to do here is define the .default, and then if there are any other organisms that do follow different MIC values or do have different MIC values, you would be able to identify those in these prompts below. And this is a scrolling field, so you can identify as many as you would like. A good thing that the system lets you do is you can see down below here that I have all this information identified. If I did want to create another entry, I do have the ability to copy from my .default or any other previous organism entries that I have defined up above. So I can do a lookup here, and I'll have my, I can just use my .default. So then we can see here that this is going to copy in all of my values that I have for my .default. So in the event that there were very minimal changes between the values, I would be able to come in here and edit those without having to put in the work of redefining absolutely everything. Okay, so we then have our susceptibility target. So here we're going to want to enter the mnemonic of the target in the body where the antibiotic should have its mechanism of action. So here we have our systemic target defined. We have our peak level, so this is going to be our peak concentration. The susceptibility target body fluid will contain total of the antibiotic. So here we could say, for example, 250 milligrams. Just do 250 since our units are defined on page 1. And then we have our normal reaction and reaction prompts. Here we're going to want to enter all the reactions that are considered normal for this antibiotic based on the sample that we have. And if we do have more than one susceptibility target defined here, we would be able to define the default as well. And if we were going through and defining more targets, we did have the ability to copy from as well, as long as the information was consistent or if we just needed to tweak it slightly. So coming down off of, branching off of our systemic susceptibility target, we're now coming down to our dilutions prompt. So here we can see that we have our dilution numbers that are used to indicate the delta highs and lows for our mic values. We can see here we have our MIC value. Here we're going to want to enter the value of the various concentrations of this antibiotic used within this susceptibility procedure for this susceptibility target. So you can see here that we have a less than or equal to 0.002. We have our reaction stats. So here we're going to want to enter the susceptibility reaction expected for this dilution. So here you can see we have S for susceptible. We can also go through and identify I for intermediate or R for resistant. If we scroll down enough, we can probably find one of those. Or not, so we will just change one of them. Okay, so then we have, for our next prompts, we have the ability to enter our delta lows and highs. So you're going to want to enter the dilution number corresponding to the concentration that represents the low end of the range for delta checking. So keep in mind this is going to be our dilution value over here. So we're going to want to be entering the numeric values over here as opposed to the MIC value. And as we go down and continue to add all of our dilution numbers, we do have the ability to copy from just to make the data entry process a little bit smoother and easier. And then lastly, coming down off of our dilutions, we do have the ability to identify just some dosage information regarding our antibiotic. So here we can see we have our route, so we can define here by mouth. We have our dose. So if we're using a traditional Z-Pack, we could be able to do two tablets PO for 1 day, and then 1 tablet for 4 days. Something along those lines. We do have the ability to use our 4RX prompt, so this is going to identify an alternate antibiotic susceptibility reaction for the route and dose. And then we also have our RX prompt, which is going to be where we identify the antibiotic susceptibility reaction that the system prints for the corresponding reaction in the 4RX prompt. So then we have the ability to identify our drug here. So we're going to do a lookup into the pharmacy drug dictionary. We can see we don't have very many entries in there. So ideally what we would want to do is if our pharmacy module was fully set up, we would have the option here to choose our azithromycin 250 milligram tablet. Okay, there we go. That's not the one. Okay, so here we can see that we have our azithromycin 250 milligram tablet, and we also have the corresponding cost per unit dose of this medication. So here we can see it's $30.71 per one tablet of this medication. So we can come down below here to our default organism. So here we're going to want to enter a default organism that appears if the organism you're resulting is not within the antibiotic dictionary. So for here, you can use a .default as well, and you can identify any different units that you would be using. And then lastly, coming over to the bottom right of page 2, we have the ability to identify any LOINC codes or nomenclature mappings that would be branching from MIS. Okay, so next, moving on to page 3, this is going to be where we can identify all of our zone sizes for our Kirby-Bauer susceptibility values. So just to give a brief overview of our Kirby-Bauer zone sizing, this is going to be where you have the plate that you are using for your susceptibility testing, specifically an agar plate. You would then grow your culture on the plate, and then by placing the antibiotic within that plate, you can see over a course of time if that organism is susceptible to that antibiotic based on the zone size created around the antibiotic, specifically how much of the growth cleared up. So those would be the zone sizes you would use to see specifically how much that antibiotic, how much the organism is susceptible to that antibiotic. So similarly to what we saw on page 2, we can go ahead and identify our default organism. And all this information up above here would be kept the same. We have, and then down below here, we have the ability to determine our zone sizes. So our through zone size, we can see here that we have 3 millimeters. So this would be considered what did that R stand for? A resistant, I'm sorry. I forgot what the R stood for a second. So here we can see that we have a zone size of 3 millimeters. This would be a resistant reaction. So then we would also have the ability to identify our delta low zones and our delta high zones that the system will be using to delta check the Kirby-Bauer results for this antibiotic. So if we did have more zone sizes here defined, we could say that a zone size of 2 is intermediate. Actually, our 4 would be intermediate, and then we could say our 5 is susceptible. So then we would be able to go through and choose our zone sizes that we wanted to identify for our delta highs and lows. We could see our delta lows could be, for example, our 3, and our high could be our 5. And similarly, coming down, we do have the ability to enter our dosing instructions and information once more for our azithromycin. You can see that this information did not copy over from page 2, as this is specific to our Kirby-Bauer susceptibility procedure. So we could go through and identify those similarly to how we just did. And then exactly as we saw on page 2, we have the ability to identify a default organism and set up our LOINC codes and nomenclature mapping. Okay, so that concludes our antibiotic dictionary. I am going to pass the controls back over to David once more, and we're going to finish up our presentation by going through some of the Access Dictionary.
Okay, so the last dictionary that we have to go over is Access. It's not long, there's only a few props that I just want to talk about. So the Access group, the microbiology settings are specific to the Access group. On the right-hand side of page 1, the MIC field should be set to yes for your users. That just gives them the ability to access all of the associated microbiology routines and desktops. The other two prompts that we have at the bottom of page 1, the micro allows suppressed result action. So you might have seen earlier that when we filed the results, there was that option to suppress result activity. This prompt gives the users the ability to actually check and suppress activity. If you don't want the users in your access group the ability to do that, or you think there's any risk in having them access to that, you can set this prompt to no, and that will suppress the pop-up with the suppress result activity. The second prompt that is at the bottom of page 1 is the micro enter edit results add prompt. So this controls whether users have the ability to add procedure prompts directly into results, into results entry. With this being said, it just gives the users in the access group the ability to add procedure prompts manually. If you set it to no, they just won't have access to adding procedure prompts. On page 2, you can set up specific procedures to be confidential to the access group. If you have any confidential procedures listed, that means only the users in that access group will have the ability to order those procedures. If you want to restrict your users in the access group for the ability to access any of the result entry screens, you can also define those here. And on page 3, you would just want to make sure that the proper performing sites are set up on your access group. But those are the only few prompts that we had left to cover. So now we'll leave the floor open to questions, both verbally or by chat, whatever works best for you guys. So Reiki, sorry if I mispronounced that, has a question. If the source is defined as a wound for the source category, shouldn't only those defined with source category of wound be listed in the drop-down box when ordering the wounds? Our system lists all sources. I think in the example that we had earlier, we had a source category called wound and an actual source called wound. So when we did a lookup into the source category dictionary from the source dictionary, we did a lookup to the wound source category. So hope that doesn't confuse you, but I know it was a little confusing because we have a source and source category called wound. So far we have no other questions. All right, have a good afternoon.